My name is June. I'm 83 years old. And the thing that finally woke me up wasn't a diagnosis, wasn't a fall, wasn't anything dramatic. It was a Tuesday in January when I realized my phone hadn't rung in 4 days, and that not a single person on earth knew that. I want you to understand what that silence feels like, because if you have someone elderly in your life, or if you are getting older yourself, this is something nobody talks about honestly. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes gradually, the way the light changes in the fall, slowly enough that you almost don't notice until one day you look up and the room is dark. My phone used to ring constantly. When my children were young and we lived in the same neighborhood as my sister and both sets of parents, the house was never quiet. There was always someone at the door, always a reason to put on a pot of coffee, always a voice coming from some room I wasn't in. I took all of that for granted the way you take air for granted, not because you're ungrateful, but because you can't imagine what it would feel like to not have it. I spent most of my adult life in Louisville, Kentucky, where I raised 3 children with my husband, Frank. Frank died 11 years ago, and if I am honest with you, his death was the first real silence. The silence that moved into the house and never left. We had been married 51 years, and in 51 years you stop noticing all the small sounds another person makes, until suddenly those sounds are gone, and the house is a different place entirely. I managed it. You do manage it. You reorganize your days and you find a rhythm, and you tell people you're fine, which is partly true and partly just easier than explaining what fine actually costs you. My children are good people. I want to say that clearly because what I'm about to tell you is not a complaint against them. They have full lives, jobs and grandchildren of their own, mortgages and schedules that move faster than I can follow. My daughter calls on Sundays, almost every Sunday, and those calls matter to me more than she probably knows. My sons check in when something comes up. None of them are neglectful. They are just living their lives at the speed that lives have to be lived, and I am here, in a house in a neighborhood where most of the people I knew have either moved or died, and the days are longer than they used to be. What I noticed in the years after Frank died was that the world had quietly stopped reaching in. Not cruelly, not intentionally, just stopped. The invitations came less frequently. The casual drop-ins disappeared entirely because that's not how people live anymore. The phone calls that used to come just to talk, just to hear a voice, started to feel like something from another era. And I could feel myself adjusting to the silence the way you adjust to a room that's too cold. Not comfortable, but eventually not surprising. The Tuesday I told you about was in January. I had been sick with a cold, nothing serious, and I had stayed inside. And on the 4th day, I sat in the kitchen and drank my coffee and thought, nobody knows. Nobody knew that I had been in this house for 4 days by myself, without any contact with another human being. Not because they didn't care, but because the systems we had all built around me had enough gaps in them that 4 days could pass completely unnoticed. That thought frightened me more than any cold ever could. I made a decision that morning that I want to tell you about, because I think it matters. I decided to stop waiting. I had been waiting for years, I realized, without fully naming it, for connection to come to me, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for someone to suggest getting together, waiting for the world to reach back in through the door it had quietly stopped using. And the decision I made that Tuesday morning, over a cup of coffee in a kitchen I had been sitting in alone for days, was that I was going to reach out instead. Not dramatically, not all at once, but deliberately and regularly and without waiting for someone else to go first. The first thing I did was call a woman from my church named Evelyn, whom I had always liked and never quite gotten around to knowing better. I called her with no particular reason, which felt strange because by the time you are in your 80s, you have somehow forgotten that you don't need a reason to call someone. I just said I'd been thinking about her and wondered how she was doing. That call lasted 45 minutes. At the end of it, she said, "We should do this more often." And I said we should, and we have. Every week or two, on no particular schedule, one of us calls the other. It is a small thing. It has changed the texture of my weeks in ways I find difficult to explain. The second thing I did was harder. I called my daughter. Not on a Sunday, not for any occasion, and I told her the truth. I told her about the 4 days. I told her that the silence was something I had been managing for longer than I had admitted, and that I needed her to know. I was not asking her to fix it. I was not asking her to call more often out of obligation, because obligated phone calls are their own kind of loneliness. I was just telling her the truth because I had spent too long protecting everyone around me from the reality of my life, and the protection had cost me more than I could keep affording. She cried, I cried, and the conversation that followed was the most honest one we had had in years, maybe in a decade, and out of it came a new kind of contact between us. Not the Sunday call where we both perform fine, but something more real and more irregular and much more nourishing. The third thing I did was walk into the senior center 2 blocks from my house, a place I had driven past for 4 years without ever going in, because I had told myself it wasn't for me, that I wasn't the type, that I didn't need it. I don't know exactly what I thought I was too good for. I walked in on a Wednesday morning when they were doing a watercolor class, which I had no interest in and no talent for, and I sat down anyway. Within a month, I knew 6 people by name. Within 3 months, 2 of them had become something close to friends, the kind you call when something happens, the kind who notice when you haven't been in. I am not going to pretend that any of this is easy. There is something genuinely humbling about needing to rebuild your social life at 83. There is a particular indignity to sitting in a watercolor class doing mediocre paintings of flowers because you are lonely and you are willing to do what it takes. I felt it every time I picked up the phone to call someone first, every time I walked into a room where I didn't know anyone, every time I admitted to myself or to someone else that the silence had gotten too loud to keep pretending it was fine. But what I found on the other side of that humility was something I had not expected. Most people were lonelier than they looked. Most people, when you reached toward them honestly, reached back. My phone rings more now than it did 2 years ago. Not constantly. I am 83, not 33, and the rhythms of connection at this age are quieter than they used to be. But Evelyn calls. My daughter calls on days that are not Sunday. The woman from the watercolor class named Barbara texts me photographs of her garden, which makes me think of my own garden and smile. These are not grand things, but they are mine, and I built them, and they exist because one January morning I decided that waiting was no longer a strategy I could afford. What I want to say to you, and I am saying this to all of you, not just the ones who are older, is that connection does not maintain itself. It never did. We just had more of it when we were younger, more automatically, and so we never had to think about it. People were everywhere. Life kept putting them in our path. But at some point, for most of us, the automatic supply runs out, and you have to become someone who reaches out first, who calls without a reason, who walks into the room even when it feels small, who tells the people in your life the truth about how you're doing, not to burden them, but because honesty is the only door that opens into real connection. The silence is still there some days. It probably always will be, but it no longer frightens me the way it did that Tuesday in January, because I know now that I have something I didn't have then. Not a fuller calendar, not a louder phone, but the knowledge that I am capable of building what I need, even now, even at 83, even starting over from a quiet kitchen with a cup of cold coffee and 4 days of no one's voice. That is not a small thing. That is everything.